Hey guys, I'm really excited to share this with you today. I'm going to show you how I made this propagation station just using an old pallet and some test tubes I bought from the dollar store for $2.50 for a pack of 2. First of all, I managed to rope someone else in to rip the pallet in half so that it was the right thickness for me. Next up, I marked out 2 lengths. They were 220 mils long, and that's going to be my top and my bottom plate for the propagation station. I marked it out wrong a little bit and then had to fix it. Then I went back through and I marked in some crosses for where I was going to drill the holes for the test tubes to slot into. So I set the middle hole up first. Mine are a little bit wonky, but I meant to put it equidistant between the 2 ends and then split the other 2 sides that had been formed from halving that in half again to put in my other 2 holes. Then I used a square just to join all the lines together to make it easier to find the exact center for drilling the holes. I got the hole saw and I started drilling the first hole and found out the hole saw was too blunt to use it to drill holes through the timber. I should mention that this pallet was hardwood timber, so it's not pine, so it's a little bit harder to drill through. So I got a different drill bit that was a little bit bent and a little bit rough and ready. So I did my best to get through it and then decided that it was too difficult for me and roped someone else in to finish the job for me. But basically you just want to drill 3 equal sized holes in only the top plate of your propagation station. You want to leave the bottom plate solid because the bottom of your test tubes is going to rest on the bottom plate. You could partially drill holes into the bottom if you wanted to, but I just wanted to make it as easy as possible. And as you can see, drilling the holes in the top plate wasn't that easy because the hole saw was blunt. So I did all of that before I cut the pieces down to size, just because it's easier to clamp off the bigger piece while you're cutting the holes in it. So then I cut the 2 top plates down to size, and then I measured out the 2 side plates and I cut them down to size as well. So the 2 side plates were around about 80 mil each, and I cut one and then I used that one to measure the second one and cut it down to size as well. And then I double checked that everything would fit together nicely, and I was pretty happy with how it looked. The next step was a lot of sanding, and I mean a lot of sanding. So the insides of the holes that were cut in the top plate were super rough, so I spent quite a long time smoothing those out, a bit with hand sanding with sandpaper and also with a Dremel bit that has sandpaper on the tip of it. You can do it all with hand sandpaper, it's just the Dremel bit made it a little bit faster, just mainly on the holes in the timber because of how rough they were from kind of being a little bit shredded instead of nicely cut. Then it was time to start putting it all together. So I pre-drilled the bottom plate of the propagation station all the way through, and with a little bit of extra for sinking the head of the screw into the bottom plate. And then I pre-drilled into the sides through the bottom plate as well, so that it was all ready for my screws to go in. And I just screwed it together there and sunk the screw heads in a bit below the surface of the timber so that it sits flatly on the timber and not on the screws, and then just neatened it up a little bit with a little bit of sanding. Just ignore the tape in the next part. It was meant to help with marking up, but it didn't, so I just left it there. But anyway, you need to mark on the side plates where you're going to put a single hole, and this hole is going to have a plug put in it so that there's no screw through the very top plate. So what I did was marked on the top plate where I wanted that hole to go, and then only drilled part of the way through the top plate so that you wouldn't be able to see anything from the top side of the station, so it would all look nice and smooth. So I pre-drilled with a small drill bit and then came back and pre-drilled with a larger drill bit to accommodate the size of the timber plug that was going to be connecting the two pieces. You can also just screw this together like I did with the base plate. So I put a piece of tape around the bigger drill bit so that I knew exactly where to stop, so that I didn't go too deep either into the side plates, because that would mean the timber plug would fall out of the top plate and end up just sitting in the side plates. And then I didn't want to go too deep into the top plate, obviously, because then I would either end up with a weak layer on top of it or go all the way through it and you'd be able to see the timber plug. Should mention that you should be wearing shoes whenever you're handling power tools. Just pretend that I'm wearing shoes here. I'm definitely wearing ear and eye protection. Wear shoes. Yep, wear shoes. So I adjusted the length of the piece of tape on the drill for the top plate because I didn't want it as sunk as deep into the top plate. You can see the little timber plugs here in the foreground of the camera shot. So the next step was just to fill the drilled hole with a bit of wood glue and then also coat the surface that was going to be between the two surfaces with a bit of wood glue. Pop some into the holes on the top plate as well, and then insert the little timber plugs into place. Tamp them down a bit. Just checking the depth of the holes. And then I just used some clamps to pull the two sides together nicely and make sure that they had a really good fit. And then I'm just going to leave this overnight to make sure that it dries properly. And it'll be time for a final sand up of any rough edges that just might need a little bit of a touch up before we do the oiling part of it. I wanted to leave it fairly rustic looking, so I didn't sand it down to a perfectly smooth finish. I also really like the darker, more rough bits of timber against the smoother bits. After sanding, it's just important to wipe off all of the bits of sanded timber, and then time to apply our first coat of burnishing oil. So with this one I applied 2 coats 24 hours apart, wiping off the excess in between, of course. Normally with this oil you would then polish it to a high sheen finish, but that's not going to be sort of the finish that I'm going for. I just wanted to go for oil because I quite like the way the oil brings out the natural colours and textures of the timber, and it's just a nice way to finish it while leaving it less finished looking than if you put like a lacquer or a varnish over the top of it. I think it just leaves it a bit more of that rustic look to it rather than looking super shiny. I like the matte look of oil. I did a little bit of polishing with a lamb's wool sanding pad, but mostly it was just getting stuck in the grains of the timber because of how sort of rough I left it. So I only did a little bit of that. It wasn't really worth trying to force it, I guess. And here it is, the finished product, all ready to go with my little test tubes and a few of my current propagations in them. Overall, I'm super happy with how it turned out. I think it's pretty darn cute, and it fits perfectly on my kitchen windowsills. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed this video and that you found it useful, because I'm super excited to share it with you, and I hope that it inspires you to give something like this a go yourself as well.